So good morning again. When I talked about Turkmenistan and introducing Central Asia a few weeks ago, I mentioned the difficulty of traveling there. I didn't realize that in fact the country's borders were closed entirely due to COVID. And those restrictions have been lifted, and now it's possible again. But I think probably probably some of the difficulties with getting a visa are still there, but at least the country is open, and there are tour companies who are now providing trips to Turkmenistan. The kind of as an overview, Turkmenistan was, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, one of the most repressive societies in Central Asia, and that continues to the day. Merv, which is now ruins in the middle of the desert, was a major center of Silk Road activity. It was at the crossroads of east-west and north-south routes, and at its height, it was one of the largest cities in Central Asia. In fact, some people say it was one of the largest cities in the world. This was in the 1100s, the 12th century. Ashgabat, which is the modern capital, is known for its garish monuments and the extensive use of white marble, as you will see it when I get to Ashgabat. Nisa was a major Silk Road city. It was the capital of the Parthian Empire at its height. The main period of occupation in Nisa was from about 200 BCE to 300 CE, and the Parthian Empire played a major role as middlemen in the movement of goods across the Silk Road. The Sogdians farther to the west, to the east, centered around Samarkand, and the Parthians down in the southwest part of what was at that time the Parthian Empire. And then we're going to jump up north to Konya-Ugach, and it was a major stop on the northern Silk Road. And I'll show you the relationship between that area and Khiva, which we talked about last time, as part of the northern Silk Road route. So here's Turkmenistan, here's Iran, there's Afghanistan. You can see how close that highway is to Iran, Afghanistan here. The way I traveled is I went by road from Bukhara to Turkmenabat to Mary, then flew from Mary to Ashgabat, spent time there, and then flew from there up to Dashuz, which is up about here, to visit Konya-Ugach, which is someplace up in this area. So, and then by road from Turkmenistan back into Uzbekistan to go to Khiva. When I introduced Central Asia, I showed you the flag of Turkmenistan and pointed out it's one of the most ornate flags in the world, and it has a lot of symbolism to it. The green background is the color Peace for Islam. This is the crescent moon that's characteristic of a lot of Islamic works. These are the republics, or the areas, districts of Turkmenistan. And then what's particularly interesting are these figures here. These represent the 5 major tribes in Turkmenistan, and those are, I don't know, did I say this was Uzbekistan? I misspoke, so I did. The 5 major tribal groups in Turkmenistan, and they are characteristic of the carpets from each of those tribal groups. And then here we have the olive branch, symbol of peace, and Turkmenistan is declared itself to be a neutral nation along with Switzerland. I'm not sure exactly what that means. They make a really big deal of it when you're there. that they are declared neutral and have a large monument to it. One of the things that Turkmenistan is most noted for are its horses. This is a call Teki horse. They're thought to be ancestral to the Arabian horses. Beautiful animals. And in Turkmenistan, horses are almost family members. They're held in such regard. Other parts of Central Asia, they eat horse meat. The idea of eating horse meat in Turkmenistan would be like somebody eating their brother. I mean, the horse really plays an important role in the history and culture of the country. And you often see pictures of the president of Turkmenistan astride a beautiful horse. I'll talk more about him in a minute. So we're going to begin in Turkmenabat. We are right up here. Bukhara is up here. So I went overland to Turkmenabat, and that's the way I entered Turkmenistan. This is no man's land. I have left Uzbekistan here, walking over here into the passport check for entry into Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan, I didn't have to have a visa ahead of time. I had to get one at the border. My guide dropped me off here. I walked across here, walked in and met my guide for Turkmenistan, who was very helpful in me getting my visa. I think there may have been an exchange of some money to make it happen, but it went rather smoothly. Took off with her, and we drove across this road. I don't know. Somebody asked me the other day where the cars are. Well, there's not a lot of traffic there, I can assure you. But here's a big chunk over here. So we're now going across the Kosakum, that's the Red Sand Desert, into a town called Mary. The reason I wanted to go to Mary was because I wanted to go to Merv. Mary is about the 4th largest city in Turkmenistan. And you can see it's right here. So we came right down this highway here to Mary and spent a day there to go to Merv. Well, we were welcomed to Mary.
There we go.
Here's a lorry, no trucks, no cars, but welcome to Mary with a nice welcoming gate, minarets and so on. Throughout Turkmenistan, you see statues like this. This is Turkmenbashi. He was the first, he had another name, which was about 10 letters long, both first and last name, a typical Tajik or a Turkmen name. He renamed himself Turkmenbashi, which means the father of the Turkmen. So he had no problem with his ego. I've got a great picture.
About how many years ago was that?
1991.
He lived in 1991.
He took over as president in 1991 and died in 2003. Yeah. So he was the first president. After the Soviet Union broke up and Turkmenistan became a country, he was the first president. And very repressive dictator. I've got a picture of this statue with a pigeon on his head. I don't think he would have appreciated that, but he was dead by the time I got there. But the point I wanted to make was that all over in the cities in Turkmenistan, you see statues similar to this, and he was quite an imposing figure. This is a regional museum in Mary that has a number of pieces from the site of Merv that I'll show you in just a couple of minutes. My hotel was right over here. Lots of monumental architecture. These things are all developed after the breakup of the Soviet Union. That is when Turkmenistan no longer was a republic in the Soviet Union, but in fact was an independent nation. This is the Independence Monument. You might recognize this guy here. That's Lenin. I'm not sure this is one of the early leaders in Turkmenistan.
Can we turn off the overhead lights? I think
Oh,
your
gosh,
slides
yes.
would show up better.
I didn't realize that had now been done, now that everybody's here.
That's better?
Better.
Okay. I apologize, it's hard to keep track. And guess what? Cars. And for those of you who don't think there are any cars in Central Asia, yes, there are. There tend to be, these are Russian cars, mostly Ladas. So anyhow, this is right as you come into Mary. This is the bazaar. It's an enclosed bazaar. So this is all the bazaar here with shops. And so this is a large city. I think it's around, if I remember right, it's about 80,000 people. So it's the fourth largest city in Turkmenistan. So the reason I went to Mary was because I wanted to go to Merv. And again, to orient you geographically, here's Merv. We came across the Amudara River here at Turkmenistan, drove down here, the capital is over here, and the ancient city of Merv is right there. And here's what Merv looks like now. Buildings. Didn't get the memo. A number of these buildings, people really don't know what they were for. This was probably a palace. Camels wandering through the spinifex. Merv was interesting. I pointed out that at one time it was the largest city in Central Asia. It moved several times because the river moved. It was an oasis city, relied heavily on irrigation for cotton. Cotton is still produced in the area. You wouldn't know it by this picture here. But it was in the 1100s, as I say, one of the largest cities, if not the largest city in the world. That didn't last long because in the early 1200s, Genghis Khan's son came and wiped out the city. The estimates are that 700,000 people were killed. So it basically went from a large city to ruins. The question came up the other day, and I'm sorry Jerry's not here. The question came up the other day, so why do you have walls? Why would you have walls and fortresses? Well, the answer is because there are a lot of bad people throughout history that have come in and attacked the various cities, and this represents it very clearly, that the city basically never recovered, and Genghis, I can't remember which son it was that had this Khanate, but basically the city was wiped out by Mongol hordes. So we see these interesting buildings. They all have names. They are huge. And as I say, people make up things what they might be. This was an ark. So you can see the ark is a fortress. And you can see the walls here. But everything else is destroyed. One of the things that's left is this mausoleum here, and this is looking across the ruins. This was restored. This is the mausoleum of Sultan Sanjar, 12th century. So this was at the height of the Merv. Merv is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and this is brick with a large dome. But this is a mausoleum. We talked about mausoleums before. This is a close-up of it. You can see the construction, and this has been reconstructed. So it didn't look like this before the Russians rebuilt it. So we're going to leave Merv, leave Merid, and we're going to fly to Ashgabat. Ashgabat's the capital. It's a little less than 1 million people. Again, to orient us, here's Ashgabat here, here's Iran, so it's very, very close to the Iranian border. Afghanistan here. So the places we've been so far, we started with South Fergana Valley. We visited Uzbekistan, a number of cities. We were in China for a while, and now we're down here. We've flown from Merid to Ashgabat. Ashgabat is a very interesting modern city. They have lots of money. The money comes from natural gas and cotton. They have reportedly the fourth largest natural gas supplies in the world. So they have a very rich economy based on income from gas. So this is a problem being in the dark because I can't see anything. This is a bus stop. It's air conditioned. There's televisions inside. Just kind of like the bench out in front of the University House.
You say it's air conditioned?
They're air conditioned. This is desert. This is Oasis City in the desert.
Did you say it's air conditioned inside?
I said air conditioned inside, yes.
Yeah.
This is an oasis city, so it's very hot. So one of the things that Ashgabat is best known for are its monuments. And they are scattered around the city. We're going to look individually at some of these, but this gives you an idea of the orientation of the city. So here's a roundabout. Here's a car. There's a few cars. Not very many cars. This is a lighted signboard, and when I was there, most of them had pictures of Turkmenbashi riding on a horse. He wore a cape, quite dashing. People have asked me, well, where do the people live? Well, these are all apartment buildings. And they're all faced with white marble. There's more marble, apparently, in Ashgabat than any place else in the world. So all these buildings are faced with white marble. So here you see lots of apartment buildings. I'm not sure what this is, but all the rest of these are apartments. So the majority of people in Ashgabat now, the old quarters have been torn down, but there's still some older places outside of town, the edges of town. But the majority of this population, it's a very metropolitan, or a very modern metropolitan city, and the majority of people live in these apartment blocks. Much nicer than the old Soviet apartment blocks that you may be familiar with. Okay, now this is looking down one of the main streets. So they got all these huge streets, big squares. These mountains are in Iran. So this is basically the Iranian Turkmen border. Or actually, the mountains are probably right on the border, but we're very close to Iran. This is called the Alam Center. This is a Ferris wheel, an enclosed Ferris wheel. You can see the Turkmen flags here, and a few people. For those of you who look for people in my pictures. This is the presidential palace here. Here's another one of those electronic signboards. Lots of flowers. This is all irrigated because it's desert, but it's an oasis city. It's on a river. And so everything is irrigated or else brown. Here's our friend Turkmenbashi with his cape. Remember I mentioned the cape? This is the horse monument. These are all bronze horses here, waterfalls, and so on. This is the Independence Monument. Here is our friend Turkmenbashi and Turkey warriors. The people of Turkmenistan, as you might imagine, given the name Turkmenistan, are Turks. These are people that moved in from the north well, I'm not sure about the dating of it, but it is a Turkish group. And I pointed out before that in Central Asia you've got Iranian, Persian-speaking groups, and then the Turkic-speaking, and in Turkmenistan, the history is Turkic. They speak a language very similar to modern Turkish, or more similar to Azerbaijani. This is a close-up of that. Big Independence Monument. This is a really interesting building. This is the wedding. See, things just happen magically. This is the wedding palace in Ashgabat, and it changes color. And I think, if I remember right, the top rotates, but don't hold me to that. But so they light it up at night in different colors, and I've got some pictures that are red, some are green. But get an idea of the size of this. I mean, you probably have a couple of little cars down here. This thing's just huge. It's absolutely massive and very, very interesting. I talked to you about neutrality. This is the monument, the neutrality monument. You can take an elevator up to here and look around. I can't remember what the name of this one is, but this gives you an idea of what the terrain is like. This is irrigated. This is desert. It's an oasis city, and so you don't get very far away from the city where the irrigation is, and you're really in the desert. This is the neutrality monument, just a close-up of it, and Turkmenistan here. And then I showed a picture when I talked about, when I introduced Central Asia, I showed a picture of this mosque. This is the Turkmenbashi Roha Mosque in Ashgabat. This was built by the father of all Turkmen, and it is one of the largest mosques in Central Asia. Four minarets. Somebody raised the question the other day about whether minarets were really a place for call to prayer. So you can see here the top of this is open, so theoretically a Muslim could go up there. But as I said when we talked about this earlier, this is all done now by recording. The interior of this place is absolutely incredible. You can see here some of the architecture of the dome. As you are aware, probably in Islam, you wash before you pray. You wash your hands, you reach your face. In some places that's done in troughs outside. This place has the most striking restrooms, ablution rooms, as you can imagine. Just row upon row of faucets and sinks. So this is the interior of the dome. Another look at it. And it doesn't show up very well, but all along here is calligraphy. Now, routinely in a mosque, that the calligraphy would be verses from the Quran. Well, Turkmenbashi took it one step better. He wrote a book called the Ruhana, which consists of a bunch of little philosophical thoughts to guide the development of Turkmenistan. And so what you see along here are quotes from the Ruhana. And you can buy a copy of the Ruhana. I think my next slide, if I remember right. Oh no, this is looking at the Mihrab. So this is the niche in the wall that points towards Mecca, and then this is the platform from which the Imam would deliver his sermons. So here's the Ruhana Monument in downtown Ashgabat. And this contains, as I say, the thoughts of our great leader, Turkmenbashi, and it's quite a stunning square and monument. The color of people's dress is really quite remarkable. We saw this in Uzbekistan before, but the figure, the material, these are probably mostly silk. It doesn't show up too well here, but traditionally, this may be one. Traditionally in Turkmenistan, women wore scarves. They didn't wear veils, but they wore scarves, not a jeep, but a scarf. And what they had was a wicker frame that would sit on the back of their head, and they tie their scarf over it. So it doesn't show up too well here. Maybe it's in one of my market pictures, it'll show up better. But I asked my tour guide, I said, how do these women have such big hair? They're not from Dallas. I mean, you know, this is not Dallas big hair. And so when we went to the market, she showed me the frames. And it's like a wicker bird cage that you put on the back of your head and then wrap your scarf around it. But you find this really colorful dress. This is actually looks almost like the gules off of the Turkmen flag. So here you can see these are young women. Here's the Turkmen flag in their festive dress for some kind of a celebration or parade. Oh, we got to go to the market. Can't miss the market. The Ashgabat market's the largest market in Central Asia. In case you didn't know this, these are all wrapped candies. So if you want, you got your sweet tooth. Here we've got fruit, probably pomegranate, but just an open air part. And then there's also the majority of the market is inside, but outside. Here's the inside. The spices here. Looks like dried fruits. That's over here. And various things, but here you can see as I've remarked before, it's interesting that you have people together selling the same things, and you know it's a question of, well, how do you decide who you're going to buy from? Textiles, colorful textiles, wide variety of designs, and then importantly, carpets. Now it's interesting, this is a small bag here. Go to the next picture, which is similar to what I had put in the poster. No, that's not the same one. You can see here, these carpets are all handmade. And you don't get a very good view, but this, you can see here, or better here, this is a very characteristic design. What's called an elephant foot. It's like, so the gules are like an impression of an elephant foot. Let's see if I got the one. I think I did. The carpets, the Turkmen carpets are ones that are oftentimes referred to as Bukhara. And so this would be referred to as a Bukhara carpet. Well, Bukhara carpets, what happened was that Bukhara was the closest major trading center after Merv disappeared. So the trading centers on the Silk Road, Bukhara was the largest close one. So people from Turkmenistan, women from Turkmenistan took Turkmen carpets to Bukhara, and they were sold there, and they were called Bukhara carpets. So many of the carpets, as you'll see, the design, and of course now they make carpets in Bukhara, but these designs you see are characteristic Turkmen. This looks like probably a saddlebag here, but this large display of carpets, and they're really remarkable, particularly if you like carpets. So any questions before I skip?
Did she not want her picture taken?
She's sitting in the sun, veiled. So I don't know. This is a commercial picture. Remember, these aren't. This is somebody else took that. I don't know. Yeah, somebody's got there's a microphone.
Who are they trying to impress with all these monuments?
That's a good question. I think they wanted to show that no longer being a repressive Soviet republic, they were expressing the fact that they were extremely wealthy, and they wanted to show the world that. What comes to mind to me are the monuments that are in Skopje in Macedonia, these huge statues, kind of as I talked about Macedonia a few months ago, the Disneyland, if you will, of the Balkans. Well, this is kind of the Disneyland of Turkmenistan or Central Asia. It's just a display of wealth. Any other questions? Yeah,
Did you buy any carpet?
The question is, did I buy any carpets? The answer is no. I bought a lot of carpets in the past. By the time I was there, I was not buying anymore.
You showed the wedding palace. Was that some big figure's wedding or available to everybody?
Pretty much available. Yeah. The question is whether or not this was restricted to big, important people in the government, and I think it's pretty well open. It's huge. I mean, there's you can have dozens of weddings simultaneously. I mean, it's not all one big room. Yeah, Laura? I think Roger? I think.
Turkmenistan being so close to Iran, what is their political relationship?
Their political relationship, they have a trading relationship, but they are neutral. So that they, I don't think, for example, would support the Ayatollah. They're maintaining, as far as I know, still maintaining this position of neutrality. But Iran's certainly a major trading partner. That's a good question. Yeah. Anybody else in the dark? Okay, so we're going to leave Ashgabat briefly, go out into the suburbs to an old town called Nisa. Nisa flourished from in the 200 BCE to 300 later BCE as the capital of the Parthian Empire. So this was after Alexander had been there. This was a major city of the Parthian Empire, which, as I pointed out, were trading partners with the key middlemen, if you will, in trade on the Silk Road. People try to figure out what buildings it meant. Well, you can see here the walls surrounding this thought to be perhaps a palace. This is another shot of that palace complex. So it's actively being excavated when I was there. This is another UNESCO World Heritage Site with active archaeological investigations underway. Here you see the walls, and this is the remains of the citadel of the Ark here. But you can see it's rather inhospitable. But part of that is some of the networks of the rivers have changed. For example, I should have mentioned when I talked about Merv, that Merv actually had about 4 or 5 different locations because it was an oasis city and the river that it was on moved, and so the cities moved. We're talking now, it wasn't like, well, today we're here and tomorrow we're over there. But over the period of the time that it was inhabited as a large city, it's thought to have moved about 4 or 5 times. So, this is the airport in Ashgabat. We're going to leave Ashgabat. This is pretty modern. And I'm not sure, but this is very similar to some of the architecture that you see in Baku and in Azerbaijan. And I think it may be done by the same architect, a very famous Turkish woman architect. And I wish I should have looked up her name. But I have a feeling, given this design, that this is worked by her, because it's very similar to some of the buildings that you see on the other side of the Caspian Sea in Baku. So we're leaving Ashgabat and we're going up to Dashugs. Dashugs is up in the northwest. Right here. So here's Ashgabat. We're flying over the desert here. Here's the Madar River here. We're going to Dashugs, second largest city in Turkmenistan. And the reason we're going to Dashugs is because there's a very important site, archaeological site here. To orient you, Kiva, where we were last week, is right about in here. So this is on, remember I talked about the northern Silk Road route that went to Kiva and also went to the next city, and we're talking about Konon and up around the Caspian. And then Ashgabat, Merv here, Ashgabat Nisa is on that, would be on the southern Silk Road, major route. So here's the airport we flew into, a little different than what we saw in Ashgabat, because this is basically an old Soviet designed airport. And the reason I went there was so I could be welcomed to Ashgabat, and we got a couple of cars, but not too many. Just, great entrance gateways into the city from the airport. So the reason I went there was to go to another World Heritage Site, a major trade city during Silk Road times, Konya Urgench. This means old Urgench. There's Urgench in Uzbekistan by Khiva. This is old Urgench, and it's in Turkmenistan. So to orient us again, we're now up here. You may recall 2 weeks ago I talked about Nukus up here. So basically we're within, 15, maybe 25 miles of Nukus. Urgench is here. That's the city. Khiva would be right here. So what we've done is we went from Samarkand to Bukhara to Turkmenabat to Merv, Mary, Ashgabat, flew up here to the Dashugs, and we're now going to look at Konya Urgench. Again, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So if you go from Dashugs to Konya Urgench, you're in the desert. This is the Red Sands Desert, and as you can see, it's a little bit inhospitable. And here is the town, the old town of Konya Urgench, which at the height of the Silk Road in the early mid first millennium CE, this was a major site along that northern Silk Road. So Khiva to Konya-Urgench, and then from there on up around the northern end of the Caspian Sea. There are a number of restored mausoleums in Konya-Urgench, and we've looked at those before, but very typical architecture with the dome and the large entrance gate here, and some Turkmen visitors. This is one of the restored mausolea here. This is tamarisk. This is a shrub that basically is one of the few things that grows to any size at all in the desert. This is a shot of the interior of the dome of that mausoleum. Again, just the kind of spectacular tile work that we see in so many places in the Tamar type of architecture. And a minaret. This is a close-up of some of the brickwork in the upper reaches of the minaret here. This has a stairway inside of it, and there will be windows up here for the call to prayer. This is another mausoleum, and one of the things that's particularly interesting about it is the interior of the dome. It has not been restored. Many of the things that we see have been restored. This has not been restored, but this is all original. This is another mausoleum. This is the Najib ad-Din Kubra, and I include this because the Islam practiced in this area tended to be Sufism, and one of the things that Sufis, and one of the things that makes some of the Central Asian Islam distinct from either Sunni or Shia is that they have saints. That's a very foreign concept in traditional Islam. So saints are venerated, their tombs are venerated, and what you see here on the stick, you'll find this. Many tombs these cloths have been tied there for prayers, asking the saint to intervene. Oftentimes it's fertility. They want to have a baby, so they will tie a flag, and this is characteristic of a number of the saints' tombs in Central Asia, not only in Turkmenistan, but Uzbekistan as well. I just included this to show you some of the, again, examples of some of the art, the plaster work here, tile, brickwork here. This is the top of one of the old buildings. So, in summary, the Turkmenistan continues to be repressive. It has a number of places that were of great interest in the time of the Silk Road, but particularly Merv and Nisa, and then Ashgabat, this modern capital, is really kind of, as I said, the Disneyland, if you will, of Central Asia with the monuments and the blinding use of white marble. When the sun's out, which is what it is most of the time, that white marble, as you can imagine, was quite dazzling. And then finally, Konya-Urgench, that we just looked at was one of the major stops on that northern Silk Road up until it was destroyed, probably in the 1300s. So if we have the lights, I'll see if there's any questions. Roger, you want to, Roger's got the microphone, and we'll turn on the lights. And if anybody's got any questions, I will be glad to take them. Yeah.
You had mentioned a number of archaeological sites. I wondered, did you really have museums that might display some of the archaeology items that they found?
It's a good question. The question is whether or not there are museums that display the sites. I know that material from Merv is in the museum in Mary. I'm not sure that there's a museum other than some exhibits on site at NISA. There's no museum at Konyurganch. There are better archaeological museum sites in Uzbekistan. For example, I talked about Afrasiab, which is the city that predated Samarkand. You got a fantastic museum. They also have national museums. So in Ashgabat, there's a large national museum that has archaeological material in it. Yes.
You mentioned that the society is very repressive. Can you give us an example of the repressive nature of the society?
Yeah, I can. My tour guide's husband was an economics professor in Ashgabat. Came out with something that was offensive to the government, lost his job, basically he was unemployable. He cannot get a job. His wife works as a tour, this was in 2008. His wife works as a tour guide, or 2014. His wife has to work as a tour guide to support her. That's the example that comes to mind.
Thank you. I was surprised that the women were unveiled, because in other parts of the Silk Road, they definitely do wear veils sometimes. And this is a Turkish society. In Turkey, many women are veiled. So why was that if it's so repressive?
Well, first of all, the government is not a theocracy. So the government, in fact, opposes to a large degree the practice of any kind of particularly radical Islam. I don't recall other than a few women in Kashgar in any of the cities that I was, anywhere along the Silk Road where the women were veiled.
Not many women.
No. The really repressive ones are in Afghanistan with the Taliban. In Iran, women aren't veiled. They wear the jib, but they're not veiled. The veiling is much more Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia and the UAE and in that part of the world. But I don't recall women wear scarves, but they don't object to having their pictures taken. I didn't have trouble with people having their pictures taken, which you would never do, say in Saudi. I've been in meetings where there are scientists from Qatar, for example, who would not be in a group photo. But I think your point about repression, it's a secular state. So it's not the same as the repression that you would see, say, in the Islamic State in Iran. I don't know whether that helps or not.
One thing that I was wondering about, I noticed the southern border with Afghanistan, and I'm just wondering what was happening while the U.S. was after the Taliban, what the surrounding countries.
That's a good question. Uzbekistan was a strong partner. I'm not so sure that was the case with Turkmenistan, but they are very worried, because it's a secular state, they're very worried about Islamic terrorists or Islamic extremists. I shouldn't say terrorists. Islamic extremists coming in. The Taliban has some presence, particularly in Tajikistan, but they're very concerned about the rise of radical Islam. as I pointed out, I think the other day when I talked about Uzbekistan, you cannot bring in any kind of religious tracts. Is that, Priscilla, did you have a question?
Actually, I have a different one from the one I was going to ask because
Okay.
somebody already asked that one. You talked about the wealth in natural gas and cotton. That's where they get their money. So do they send that to Russia in spite of Russia's being supposedly banned?
I have no idea. I doubt it, because I think they're looking to the West as opposed to Russia.
Really?
I mean, I'm trying to remember whether either Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan joined the group that formed, economic group that formed after the decline of the Soviet Union. I'm not sure that they did. They're very concerned, at least from my understanding when I was there, of the continuing power of Russia. The majority of Russians, there used to be very large Russian populations, which, at least in Uzbekistan, which I know better, the majority of Russians have left because they are kind of, there's hostility towards them, I guess is what okay. It's your turn.
Yeah, I was just interested in the massive statues. They look almost like the Soviet pattern. Is that kind of an imitation?
I would say it's an outgrowth of that.
Where was it that he renamed the days of the week and the months and things like that?
That was in Turkmenistan.
Okay.
Yeah.
After his family.
After his family, yeah. That mosque that I showed you in Ashgabat, the Turkmenbashi Mosque, is basically the village where he grew up. He was a poor kid, but somehow, I don't know the history of it, but he rose to power within the Soviet system, and then took over as president. Yeah.
Cotton takes a tremendous amount of water. Are they switched in any other kind of agriculture?
Wait till you get the mic.
Cotton requires a heck of a lot of water. They're switching to any other kind of agriculture?
Cotton still is a cash crop. They have, they grow pomegranates. The cotton is a major source of income. And yes, it takes a lot of water. That's why the Ural Sea disappeared and continues to disappear. Joan? Oh, okay. Yeah, Bob?
Other than the stands have existed in the past, why do they exist today? Why does Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and so forth, why do they exist today?
What would you like to have instead? I'm not sure. They were republics in the Soviet Union. They were republics that were based on the primary ethnic group, which is linguistic. So that when the Soviet Union broke up, they had been republics in the Soviet Union. Before that, there were khanates. The concept of nationhood is a relatively new idea. But when the Russians came in, beginning I think it was about in the 1880s, when the Russians came in, they broke down the khanates and then reorganized on the basis of linguistic groups. And that's part of the problem today, is you've got islands. If you recall the other day, there was a young lad, or young boy here, who was from Bukhara. His family were Tajik. So they were not Uzbeks, but there are these islands of ethnic groups. Somebody said, what happened to the Russians? The Russians went back to Russia. I think that was your question. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, that's the end of the Silk Road. Thanks.